Welcome back. In the last step, we created our first HTML project and then we created our first HTML file, which is the index.html. In this step, we would be adding some HTML tags in this document and then we would be executing it on a web browser to see the effects of the tag added. So to begin with, we will start with a simple tag. Before that, what exactly is a tag? A tag is a special text which is present in between an open and closing angle bracket. So let's look at a simple tag first, which needs to be present in every HTML document. This tag is known as the document type definition. To write the tag, let's go ahead and create an open angle bracket, provide an exclamation mark, and then type doc type in capitals, followed by HTML in small case. Then you close it with a closing angle bracket. So the text doc type HTML in this case becomes the tag as it is present between the open and closing angle bracket. Why do we need to provide the document type? We will look into that later in this course with a very good example to understand the need for this tag. Following with this, we will have to provide the browser HTML tags to let it know that we are going to write HTML code. So to do that, you do the same thing. You open an angle bracket and then you type in HTML in small and then you provide a closing bracket. As you see here, the Komodo Edit IDE automatically added a closing tag /HTML to my open HTML tag. So how do you provide a closing tag? A closing tag is provided by writing the same text as that of the open tag preceded with a backslash as you see here. In case of an IDE, the IDE would automatically provide a closing tag to every open tag out there. But if you're writing this in Notepad or any other text editor, you would have to manually supply this closing tag for every open tag that you provide here. Not every open tag in HTML needs a closing tag. There are some special tags known as empty tags which do not need closing tag. We would be looking at those tags later in our course. So what we did here is that we went ahead and provided the document type by giving the doc type as HTML, and then we let the browser know that any code that is going to be HTML is going to be provided between these two HTML open and closing tag. Now the next step is to go ahead and divide this HTML web page into two sections. Now those sections are the head and the body section. So let's go ahead and provide a head tag, and the IDE would automatically add a closing head tag followed by a body tag which needs to be provided the same way, and the IDE would provide a closing body tag as you see here. So what is the difference between the head and the body section? Ideally, any content which is present inside the head tag would not be visible on the web browser when you open the web page. As contrast to that, any content which is present between the body tag would be visible in the web browser when you open the web page in the web browser. There is an exception to this, however. There is a tag known as title tag which is placed between the head tag, and this title tag, the content of the title tag will be visible in the web browser when you open the web page in the browser. So let's provide a simple title to our web page. Let's call it basic HTML. So this title text that we provide, basic HTML, will be visible on top of the web page when we open the web page in the web browser. We would be looking at that in a short while when we would be executing this web page in a browser. So now, as I discussed that any content present between the body tag will be visible in the web page in the browser, we would go ahead and add a simple tag called the bold tag represented by the alphabet B as you see here. Now this tag, any text present between the open and close bold tag, will be visible in bold format when we load this web page in the web browser. Let's add a simple text here. This is my first web page. Now in order to know the difference between this bold tag and the other plain text that can be seen in a web page, let us add one more tag known as the paragraph tag, which is represented by the alphabet P. So you add P and paragraph, and let me add the same text here. This is my first web page. I'm going to save this web page. So now we will go ahead and execute this HTML code. To do that, in Komodo Edit, all that you need to do is you need to click on this little browser icon which says View in Browser. When you click that, it's going to automatically load this web page for you in its built-in browser navigation pane where you can see the HTML code that you created. So as you see, the tags were added in our code and only the effects of the tags are visible on this particular browser when you open the web page. So you see that the basic HTML title that we added inside the head tag using the title tag is visible as the title of this web page. Similarly, the text which we added inside the bold tag under the body tag is visible in bold in the output, as well as the text which is which we added under the paragraph tag present inside the body tag is visible as a normal text. So this shows the difference between the bold tag and the paragraph tag which is present in between the body tag. So congratulations, you have written your first HTML web page and opened it in a browser to have a look at it. So now let's get back to our discussion. Remember, we were talking about as to why do we need to provide the document type definition to the browser. So let's add more detail to it. So this doc type HTML that you see here, which we provided as the first tag in our browser, in our HTML code, even if we remove this particular tag and if we save it and refresh the browser, you will see that you do not see any visible change happening in your HTML output. Then why do we need to provide that doc type definition at the beginning of the HTML page? So let's look at a detailed example which explains as to why do we need this tag. So to know that, you need to understand that a browser works in two different modes. To get to that, let's try to understand what HTML is again. So as we discussed in the previous lecture, HTML is a markup language. So a markup language is nothing but a collection of tags, as you see here, the title tag or the bold tag or the paragraph tag. And all these tags are nothing but some standards which are set forward by a group known as W3C, that is the World Wide Web Consortium. So this group, they go ahead and specify the kind of effects that each tag should be having when you specify them in your HTML code. So this group is known as the World Wide Web Consortium, and you can know about them at w3c.org. So when you go to this website, you will get to know more about the World Wide Web Consortium, and these are a set of people who come ahead and set some standards that needs to be applied when you specify a tag in your HTML page. So now what happens is that these standards are specified in different versions. So you have a HTML standard version for HTML4, HTML3, HTML2. Similarly, you have HTML standard, that is HTML5, which is the latest version. So when these standards are specified, the browser that is going to implement an engine which computes these HTML tags and displays the output as you see here, the browser may be in a different version when these standards are set forward. So for example, a Chrome could be in a version number 2, which follows the HTML4 standards when the HTML5 standards have been defined out by the w3c.org. So in this case, the browser may not be able to understand as to what version of HTML are you going to provide in your HTML code so that it can adjust its engine to work with that specific version. So that's when this document type definition tag comes into picture. So when you use the document type definition and provide it as HTML in small case as you see here, it lets the browser know that it has to work with HTML version 5 and further and not work with any HTML version lower than version 5. So let's go ahead and look at a simple example to make this more apparent. Before we go into that, the browser, when it is setting the engine to work with HTML5 and above, it is going to set the standard of its engine into something known as standards mode. So it's defined as standards mode. So when it is working with HTML5 and above, the browser would ask its engine to go ahead and set it to work with standards mode. And when it is working with any HTML version lower than 5, it's going to set it into something known as quirks mode. So a browser can work either in a standards mode or in a quirks mode. And the way the browser knows that it has to run its engine in a standards mode or a quirks mode is by using this doc type HTML tag. So now let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and see an example which will show you the difference between the standards mode and the quirks mode, and the difference between HTML5 standards and the previous HTML version standards. For that, I would be adding some tags here just to show the difference between the two modes. You do not have to worry about these tags right now, because these tags we are going to anyway look at it in the future steps. For now, just think about these tags as some effects that is going to be added to your HTML web page when it runs on the browser. So the first tag that I will be adding is a style tag. One thing is to be noted is that in HTML, all the tags are written in smaller case and not in uppercase. This is not something that the browser puts in as a rule. You could actually go ahead and write your HTML in uppercase as well, and it's going to work perfectly fine in the browser. But it's kind of a coding standard that is followed, that any tag that you write in HTML has to be in smaller case, except for the doc type tag, which we provided the doc type in capital, as you see here. So the first tag that I'm going to add is a style tag, and to the style tag I'm going to go ahead and add a class name known as dot class name. Don't worry about what this is. We will be going into these in detail in the future lecture. Currently, just think about it as some ID that I'm providing. So I'm providing an ID as dot class name, everything in lowercase, and I'm giving it a color of red. So similarly, I'm going to provide one more ID, dot class name, but in this case the N, the alphabet N in that ID is in capital, as you see here. And I'm going to provide it a color of color green. Okay, so we added a style tag, and then we added two IDs, a class name with lowercase and a color red to it, and a class name with N in uppercase and a color green to it. Now the next step we are going to do is that, as I said, you don't have to worry about these tags. We will be going over the style tag and also the class name, what those are, in the future lecture in detail. I'm doing all this only to show the difference between the quirks mode and the standards mode, and to understand as to why do we provide the document type. So the next tag that I'm going to add is I'm going to add a div tag, and here I'm going to provide a class to that div, and I'm going to give it the name of class name, the one that we specified earlier. But as you see here, I'm using the class name as the one with the lowercase. Everything is lowercase, the N is not capitals, as we had two class names, one with a capital N and the other one with all lowercase. So we are going to use the one with all lowercase, and I'm going to provide a sample text here, hello world. So after that is done, let me first go ahead and remove the doc type HTML tag. So as I told you earlier, when I remove the doc type HTML tag, the browser is going to tell the engine to run in quirks mode and not in standards mode. That means the HTML code that we have written in this page, the browser's engine is going to treat this HTML code as something which is below the version 5 and not 5 and above. So let me go ahead and run this code. So to do that, I just have to save this page. And as you see, the hello world text is seen in our browser, but what is the color that we see it in? The color that it comes out in the output is green. That is not something that you would be expecting, right? Instead of, even if you don't know what these tags were doing, just by using basic understanding, the class name ID present here is in all lowercase, and that is the class name ID that we provided here, right? And the color that we set for that lowercase class name is red. So you would expect this hello world to be seen in red color here and not in green. But what happened here is that the browser, it ran in the quirks mode, and when it runs in the quirks mode, it does not consider the case. It runs in a case insensitive mode. That means the class name with all lowercase is treated equivalent to a class name with a capital N in it. And it applied the latest color effect of green to the text that we provided. And that's why you see it in green. Because any version of HTML which was lower than 5 did not take case into consideration. So it treated the class name with lowercase exactly the same as the class name with an N with an uppercase. So that's why it went ahead and applied the latest color standard of green to this hello world text. Now let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and add that doc type tag again. So I'm going to add the doc type, and I'm going to specify it as HTML. So when you add the doc type tag again and you specify it as HTML, Now, as I told earlier, it's going to set the browser engine to run in standards mode. So when it runs in standards mode, it's going to treat all of our HTML code as HTML5 and above. So in HTML5 and above, the standard which has been set is that the case has to be taken into consideration. So class name all in lowercase is not equal to class name with n in uppercase with it. So in this case, when I save it, and when I save it, it automatically refreshes the browser. So when I save it, you can see that it changed the color of hello world into red. This happened because it took the HTML5 standard where the class name lowercase text here is not equal to class name with an uppercase n, and since we have provided a lowercase class name here, it's going to put the hello world text in red. So that shows you the difference between running the browser in a standards mode and the quirks mode, and it also gives you a major understanding as to why do you need this doc type HTML tag, why do you need to specify the doc type definition before you start writing your HTML code. As a general rule, just keep it in mind that whenever you write any HTML web page, you will have to specify the doc type definition, because that helps us to keep our HTML code in HTML5 and later version, and allows the browser to take into consideration many of the HTML5 and any further versions of HTML standards that's going to come out. So this gave you a brief example and a brief understanding. As I told before, don't worry about the style tag, what exactly those tags are, and don't worry about the div class tag. We would be looking at those in detail in our future steps. In this step, we use them only to understand the difference between the quirks mode and standards mode, and to understand as to why do you need the document type definition. So that brings the step to an end. So in this step, we looked at creating a document type definition, and then we provided the HTML tag. We understood what tags are. We provided the HTML tag. The HTML tag, as we discussed earlier, allows the browser to know that any code which is present between the HTML tag is HTML. Then we went ahead and divided our HTML page into two sections, the head section and the body section. And as we discussed, any content present between the body tag is displayed on the web page, and ideally any content which is present between the head tag is not displayed on the web page except for the title tag, which we looked at, and we provided a basic title of basic HTML that was displayed on our web browser when we opened the web page. Similarly, we also looked at the body tag, and we looked at the bold tag, which put our text in bold in the web page when we loaded the web page in the browser. And we looked at a paragraph tag, which just displayed our text in a plain format, as you see here in the web page when we loaded the web page in the web browser. We also discussed the difference between the quirks mode and standards mode of browser, and that helped us to understand why do you need the document type definition to be provided at the top of your web page. So that brings it to the conclusion of this step. In the future step, we will be looking at more basic HTML tags, which will deal with formatting the text, and we would understand all the other basic HTML tags out there.